Call this meeting of the Marvin Planning Board for Tuesday, March 15th to order. I show that it is 6:01, and we do have a quorum. We're missing Michael and Melinda, but we do have quorum. Everybody read the agenda? Any questions, comments, revisions suggested?
None for me.
Anybody? I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved.
All in favor?
Do we need to move in second?
He was the move, he was
Yeah.
second.
Okay.
Okay. I do the easy ones. I'll leave the harder ones to you.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Next on the agenda is adoption of the previous meeting minutes.
And you have two sets in your packet from February 15th and the joint meeting with council on March 1st.
Any comments or revisions to the minutes as presented?
No, sir.
Hearing none, I will also move for the adoption of the two sets of minutes from previous meeting.
So moved.
Yep.
All in favor? All right. Moving on. Next on the agenda is election of officers for the upcoming year. Let me sort of start this out and...
By going not it, don't do that.
Well, let me start out for everybody's information. I know for a fact I am going to be out of town, out of touch for at least 2 meetings. That would be in May and September, I think I said.
Those are spaced far apart, so you're
But-
fine as far as our attendance
Well,
policy
but
goes.
also, you know, and in light of previous, you know, what we've gone through with COVID and what my wife is still fighting, you know, residual effects to her. I don't know what the year's going to bring. You know, we may say, once she gets over it, we may say, we're running away for a while. I don't know. But I just let everybody be aware of that before we get started. So, moving on. We'll accept nominations from the floor from anyone.
I would be happy to continue to be vice chair. I would, if you wanted to step down as chair, my biggest issue is that I can't attend the village council meetings. So
And
that's my only issue.
I don't attend many.
Yeah, it's not something that you have to
It's
do
not-
often.
It's not,
Well, I couldn't do like
In
any.
when John's not there, usually it's Bob and Hunter that gives an update since Bob's here.
yeah, and you know, the only times I've really been there is for
Really something major.
you know, adoption of the land use plan or something like that. So those really, I think, you know, that sort of thing's the only ones I've made a point to make.
Okay. Well, I mean, I will continue to be vice chair if the board would like to, but if no one, I'm going to give someone else the opportunity to step
Yeah.
forward to.
So you,
Nominations,
Chair.
people.
They don't have to be present either.
Ken,
you
Can't-
you have to be present to accept, I believe. But to accept a nomination, you have to be present. So Michael's out of luck.
yeah. Ken or Kent, any nominations?
Rich, or you?
Not for me.
All right.
Well, I think I have a very similar problem to you. That I wouldn't be able to make the meetings. I mean, I wouldn't mind if
Okay.
I would do a co-chair. And I don't
Has
have
to
an
only
issue.
has to be one. Has to be one.
Roger Clifford.
I know.
Sorry, I have to put on.
All right.
Go
Well, I
ahead.
mean, I'm, you know, I'm not I mean, I'm happy to chair if I could have a vice chair that would share, just in case John needs to be able to.
It's
run
whatever
away.
you guys want to do.
And like I
There's
said,
not a lot of people
I
here
just,
to talk about it.
I just wanted everybody to be aware that.
Yeah,
when-
no.
I mean, especially,
Yeah.
you know, I missed several, you know, because of COVID and stuff, and so.
Well, you were online.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
online.
They
And,
know
you
what-
know, filling in is not a problem at all. Like, it's just,
Now, you know, if people are aware of that and still want me to stay, that's okay with me, but I just want everybody to know up front.
Sure, no, it's.
What do you want to do, John? I mean, that's the other thing is, I know this isn't like a nomination process right now, but
Yeah,
like,
we're just.
you know what I mean? Like, you need to be able to voice your own, like, wants and needs.
Yeah,
And
you know,
you
I've
shouldn't
been,
feel pressure to stay.
yeah,
if you want
I've
to.
enjoyed it, and I think, but like I said, I don't want to put the board as a whole in a hole. You know,
Again, this is completely the board's decision.
I know.
and and so, it depends, if the board is okay with those caveats, and I wouldn't do it, unless, some sudden illness or something like that, I wouldn't do it the day before or something like that.
When does the official term end?
Today. Well, technically it ended March 1st.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're in new territory.
I was thinking April 1st, but March.
My
It's
Rotary
March.
presidential term doesn't end until July, so.
So that's the reason this is loosey-goosey, we don't,
Any-
we're not.
If anyone who accepts either the chair or vice chair position, you're not stuck with it for a year. You can resign from that position while still being on the board if you want to give it to another member. So it's up to however you guys want to do it. John, you're still good to sign the minutes because you're still chair until they
I
vote.
don't mind being chair, but I up until July, it'll just be hard for me to do any additional meetings. That's all I could do.
I don't think you're going to have any additional meetings.
Okay.
I can fill in wherever necessary. I mean, I'm not, my thing is very similar. I mean, I'm full-time.
Because we don't have any more joint meetings, and it's rare this board calls a special meeting.
Yeah, well, I gotta get some clarification. This, for example, the Heritage District, and when the Heritage District was passed, we used our individual conditional zoning process, and there's a council planning board preliminary review. I'm looking into that, maybe amending that, it's not where it doesn't keep you guys in the know, but it's just like, is that necessary, or is that just, or is that just still something where, once again, we just kind of follow our normal process and you guys review and provide a recommendation during your meeting and so on. That would be the only additional special meetings, and that's hard to foresee depending on when we get applications.
Let me throw this, the three of us have been meeting basically the week before to go over preliminary agenda and discuss and stuff. And quite honestly, I started it way back when I was still a novice with Laura. I said, I don't know, maybe we need to get together ahead of time. And I think that's worked out pretty good.
Technically, in your rules of procedure, you guys are all supposed to get the agenda early, but you guys kind of just giving it to John to sit down with us the week before. So we can do it however you guys want. The person who's the chair can meet with us, the vice chair can meet with us, the whole board can get the agenda. It's really whatever you guys prefer.
Really, all those meetings are is kind of going over what the agenda's gonna,
Yeah,
and what those
and-
items, so everybody's in the know, but typically
It can
outside
also
of,
be handled through email, right?
Or a phone call, WebEx
call.
meeting is.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
like I said, and I'm not pushing it, I started it, at my request originally, because I was such a novice at every, at the board and everything else.
Right.
And so, and if people don't see a need for that, that's fine.
Is it possible to have two co-chairs?
No.
It's got to be one of each. It's gotta be
One of each.
One.
once again, and
It's
then
my job to shut
you
down
wanna
technically illegal
clarify-
ideas.
You
Okay.
want to clarify the duties, basically that the chair, when president, runs the meetings and everything, and the vice chair.
Decide on the order of motions. We don't get super contentious here, so you're really not going to have to dig deep into Robert's rules, but that's why I'm here.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine taking over chair if John wants a break.
Someone needs to make a nomination.
All right, you want to nominate me and I'll nominate you?
Yes.
It's just like in the sandbox.
Full name.
You can just say Kelly.
I nominate Kelly to be chair of the planning board. I make a motion. To
Hold on,
nominate
you
Kelly.
do two. You do nominations, then you make a motion secondary.
Okay. So I make a nomination to have Kelly as the chair of the planning board.
And you accept the nomination.
I will accept the nomination.
It's then now you need to make a motion.
Go.
Oh, me, yeah, still. submit a motion that we accept the nomination for Kelly as chair of the planning board for the upcoming year. Any second?
I'll second the motion.
All right. Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. All right.
There you go.
There you go.
All right, I would now like to nominate Rich as the vice chair
Okay, hold on.
But.
and nominate John as the past chair.
Wait, what?
Immediate past chair.
I don't know what that means.
It's just, it's just a title.
Um,
Immediate past chair.
Sorry, I'm making this in my minutes, and yep, you agreed to make a motion.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, does he have to accept first?
He does have to accept.
I do accept for co-chair of the planning board.
All right.
Vice chair.
Vice chair, excuse me.
Yeah.
Pardon
Trying to give yourself a promotion already.
Make a
There you
motion that we accept the nomination of Rich for vice chair for the planning board for upcoming year.
Vice chair.
I'll second it.
And Kelly, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
2 online?
Aye.
All right. Do I hand over now?
You can.
Oh Lord, I'm not ready for this.
That's what you just signed up for. So.
I know. I wasn't ready to get
Yeah.
the gavel like at the
You already
moment.
signed?
Yeah.
You're good there.
One more time. Good old time's sake.
So yeah, you're good to hand it off to Kelly. Do you have a copy of the agenda in front of you? I can get you a paper one if you want.
We have done, so now we're moving on to public comment.
Mm-hmm.
All right, do we have folks here for public comment or?
They're applicants.
Yeah, they're applicants.
They're applicants.
Okay.
You don't have anyone online?
No one
either?
online, all right, so then we're gonna move on to our items of discussion. One being to continue the discussion and consider the recommendation of zoning text amendment application 222-1, amendment to multiple sections of the Marvin Code of Ordinances regulating agricultural accessory uses.
Okay, as we discussed in our last meeting, we received an application for a zoning text amendment, kind of addressing chapters 90 and 151. Chapter 90 is our animal control chapter, and then 151 is our zoning. Basically, kind of, I think the application should be in your packet. The applicant, Ms. Lyons, has done a very good job at really going above and beyond, in my opinion, on kind of outlining the changes, really how I would do it, and kind of some justification. She also provided in the packet the 3 ordinances that she used as a reference, which was Gastonia, Waxhaw, and Davidson. I did some additional research, and there are some additional changes that, that's open for discussion. Basically, the ways that this can go is you guys can review, make a recommendation as presented, make a recommendation with revisions, recommended changes, and really then it's kind of on the it then falls on the applicant when it goes to council with those changes that are recommended with that if she agrees with them, or she still would like to have it go to council as presented. It really just kind of depends on wherever that middle ground is. Like I said, I think there's a very good base here, and I think overall there's not much changes. It's just some of the regulations itself, and then adding in and kind of codifying how it all intertwines between the accessory uses and structures as well as the animal control chapters. So I'll kind of turn it over. I'll let you maybe, if you want to just add in, and then we'll kind of get into the ordinance itself.
Yeah, so do we want to, I don't know how familiar people are, how much detail you want me to get into?
I don't know how familiar.
The board needs to give consensus for her to speak first. So do y'all want to let the
no,
applicant speak?
someone on the board make a motion to allow our applicant to.
You don't have to do a motion.
we
You just have to agree as a.
Is everybody cool with our applicant taking the floor?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, anyone online have any opposition to that?
You're good.
Peace.
All right, so I'll try to keep it quick and high level.
Actually, can I have her move to the table?
Please,
so that they can-
whatever you need to do.
Yeah, if you want to move on up here, just so they can hear
Because
you.
there's
We don't have microphones yet.
Would you like me to share the printouts?
That'd be great, yeah.
Or actually, if we're all on eScribe, if you could just direct us to the,
They're not in the pack, though.
no, these are not in the packet, but
No.
like, is there, which document would you like us
So, John,
focused on from eScribe?
I think we're gonna go off what she's provided to
The
first, and then we'll go into
The
the.
application, so we've got,
Can you mute? Can you?
interested to the meeting, I didn't realize it's on the agenda, it said election of officers.
Hey Bob, we just muted you.
so there's in our attachments, in our
Did you
attachments.
hear?
Yes.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's okay. No worries.
In our attachments, we've got two that start with ZTA 2022-1. One says agricultural accessory uses PDF, and the other one's just a PDF.
I think it's the PDF, because I think that's the
Well, they're
cover
both
letter.
PDFs.
Well, I think it's just the ZTA 2022, because I think the first one's your cover letter.
I'm opening them, but yeah, the first document you always see is a cover sheet.
Okay.
Which
all right.
basically just states, hey, we've received this, a little background information, but other than that, it's, the application itself is probably what to focus on, and then I'll pull up, you guys have some of the supplemental material in front of you as well as in your packets, and I'm gonna pull up that as well.
Okay. And all the changes or the additions that are being made are in red.
Yes.
Correct, by the applicant, and then
Yes.
I've got a document that has hers
And yours?
some of, yeah, that for discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna go through the whole spiel of last time, but, so, this came about, there's several areas in the village with large tracts of land, a lot of beautiful areas. So, a lot of these properties have been, where they haven't been selling before, they're selling, we're getting a new generation of, resident moving in. And when people move in, they don't realize, sometimes they look at these properties like, I have all this land, I can do whatever I want. They don't realize they need permits for things, and there's really no guidance on livestock in any of the village ordinances. So what I tried to do was, I looked at, like Hunter said, I looked at Gastonia, Davidson, and Waxhaw to see what their ordinances were. So these are 3 suburbs of Charlotte. Waxhaw's right next to us. Davidson's pretty similar to us, and Gastonia still has some rural areas left as well. If you go to, do you want me to just dig into some of where the meat of this starts? What we wanted to change?
Yeah,
Or-
I
I mean, because we've all read the initial one. Are there changes from?
From what her initial
This is
application
still-
was. Her initial application is the same. I then dove in and basically I looked at all 3 that she provided, as well as I provided a matrix in there, and kind of I was looking at a lot, because the way that this can be done in a way, I mean, we have our zoning regulations, which in my kind of recommendation, some of this needs to be clarified in our zoning. In chapter 151, section 054, which is accessory uses and structures, we have already identified as agricultural uses as an accessory. It specifically goes into detail, or sort of detail, with horses and chickens, and then I think it says all other livestock must be on this.
Yeah.
The issue that I run into there, that I'm kind of killing kind of 2 birds with 1 stone with this, is that the clarification on those, and actually I'll just pull it up. One sec.
Because just for time's sake, I believe everyone who is online and in the room was here at the last meeting, so we have reviewed her initial proposal, so it'd probably be.
I just wanted to explain quickly kind of the basis for this, now that people have had time to review. I used mostly Gastonia because it was very structured, but I also have these other 2 documents that I gave you. These are from the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service, and what the Extension Service does is they provide guidance to residents of the entire state. There's usually one for every county. So if you want to figure out the best way to build a garden, or you've had a problem with your grass, you go to them. They're the experts on, this is how you should be doing this. So I got this document, I was like, what's reasonable for residential chickens? And this is the document that they gave me this. And if you go through here, I highlighted some key points. It sort of mirrors what I found with Gastonia, that, you want to contain your animals, contain your feed, clean up the excrement, and then it brings up the what it means, the implications of roosters. It hits on roosters a few times in here, and the challenges with them.
They don't just crow in the morning.
And then there's a one-pager here. This is also from the Cooperative Extension Service, and it talks about the benefits of backyard chickens and concerns with backyard chickens. And so some of the stuff I've proposed is in these documents from the Poultry Division of the Extension Service.
The question on your proposed change for Chapter 9, or Chapter 90,
Yes.
Animal Control.
Yes.
That's the Union County ordinance.
Right now for the Village of Marvin and mirror Union County.
All right, that was,
Correct.
that was my question. We
Sure,
mirror,
that's one of the issues that we, as the village, runs into. And this is honestly typical in a lot of municipalities, is when municipalities form or whatever, they typically have like zoning and kind of all these ordinances, and they'll just say, and then they'll adopt all these other ordinances from the county, and that's quote unquote what they follow. Question that's unclear in that is who enforces it.
I was going to say,
Even though it's our ordinance, it's like,
it puts a lot of quote. It says that we have a lot of burden now.
yeah.
I mean, as far as enforcements and permitting and all this other stuff.
So that's where, like, her change in making it that, I mean, some of this is also, like, will need to be kind of subject upon, like, some of the attorney just clarification there. But I think, yeah, adding that it's the Village of Marvin, even though some of the language that we don't change still mirrors what the counties is, it really just clarifies this is our ordinance and this is who enforces it. Because I think it mentions Union County, and then it talks about the Union County Animal Control Officer or stuff like that, or the Animal Control Officer. Well, then, does that fall under my purview as code enforcement officer? It should, because it's in our code of ordinances, but it's still kind of just clarifying some of just the enforcement authority there. And so just kind of putting it in the village is straightforward. You got a question?
So how much, because I don't know the Union County ordinances, how much further would we want to restrict based on what would be ideal for Marvin residents? I mean, because like, what do we, if we were to just fall back on Union County ordinances because of code enforcement, what are we losing out on, and like, what do we have to gain by?
The county, so the county has such a broad one ordinance, but they also have a broad, like, on who it impacts. Like, when their ordinances are adopted, and even from a zoning standpoint, they're typically less restrictive because there's a lot of differentiation in one side's property versus another. So then, to be fair, unless they really get detailed and create a lot of different zoning districts or certain regulations and stuff, it's very broad and.
Yeah, and I would add to that, the populations in, like you said, in Union County are very diverse. So the western part of the county is a certain demographic, and the eastern part, it gets very rural.
Yeah.
And if you go out there in the summer,
You can tell.
Yeah, there's some distinct smells. Let's put it that way.
So they don't have anything in their ordinances that state, X size acreage has these restrictions, or
No,
they don't restrict it based on acre size,
It's actually compared, almost more, it covers dogs and cats on it more than anything else.
And once again, to be honest, and with Chapter 90, and if you read some of the codification where it says like ordinance revisions, whatever, when it was done, because all this used to be, a lot of agricultural land anyway, and so it's like that's where it didn't really hit on that. And our ordinance is then even dated to that to an extent because it's not clear. It needed to be, this is one of the sections in all honesty that need to be updated anyway. And so that's where I'm kind of saying like, it's kind of killing kind of two birds with one stone. It's adding clearer language. As I mentioned, there's a lot of stuff in our ordinances in general that just aren't clear. It doesn't make it easy for me to enforce. It doesn't make it easy for residents or if it's existing new people moving in to interpret. And so clarifying then the animal, but as well as then kind of adding that additional language or those regulations right into the zoning ordinance. And that's kind of what I was showing is that this is from 151.054, which is accessory use and structures. Like we had agriculture buildings as an accessory use and structure, and these were the regulations. The reason I have them in green is because it's unclear, and I even talked to the attorney about this. When you read it, it says accessory uses and structures. That's typical, but then they typically in most ordinances will break out structures and uses. Uses are typically the whole property. I mean, so the setbacks you would think would then apply to the structure, and it just needs some clarification. As well as I think it could use some updating.
Yeah.
And I'll explain why. It's not where we're actually getting any least restrictive. I think we're actually going to get more restrictive and clearer in this. And some of this is when we get into some of my recommendations, I'll kind of have my explanation and justifications in some of this. But overall, it's stuff that's needed in general. I mean, it brings up good points on, I said, kind of clarifying, I think, a chapter of our ordinance that just has been neglected because it is what it is, but as well as clarifying the stuff in the zoning side.
I mean, it's clear that it's needed because this is a lot of information that more than likely people are either trying to doing, and we have nothing on it. But I mean, I do think that, and I don't know if I don't think this is a planning board thing, but it definitely has an impact on the village. But how do we need this language? We need these updates. We need clarification. But then how do we address the what do you call it? The enforcement aspect of it.
Well, and that's
where that a village? Yeah. Is that a village council?
Well, if we update the language, and that's where I would, for example, chapter 90. I think adding basically what she said with Village of Marvin, animal control, whatever chapter. That clarifies it, and I'll get some just clarification from the attorney if there's any additional language on strictly enforcement. Anything in the zoning is straight in my purview, and that's why I want to try to overlap them just in case to have that backing, because if you put some of the regulations that she puts in, like for example like the pens and coops, like I went even further in some of my recommendations on setbacks. And this is, for example, this is where I have highlighted in green, kind of clarify, and why I put it in yellow. I said add language stating that the structure must comply with applicable setbacks and stuff. So it's like, it's right there. And there is no question of anything in the zoning if they don't comply. And so you'll see some cross-reference and overlap in some of my recommendations, and that's just straightforward. And it just kind of makes sure that we do have that authority. And because, I'll mention like there's one addition that I put in here that says like must comply with like chapter 92, which is noise, and 151. And once again, it just says, hey, like for you to be compliant in this section, you also need to be in compliance in this section. And we do that already with like pools, for example. We cross-reference landscape and buffering and maybe fences. Now all that's within zoning, but cross-referencing sections saying, hey, like here it is.
I mean, and that's the other thing is like we do with pools. Is there going to be some type of visual shielding requirement or are they going to have to permit a chicken coop, or like what once you put this in, is it just that these are the things you're allowed to do, or do they actually have to apply to keep livestock, or like
We discussed that in one of our meetings.
Yeah, so a lot of people do have permits and applications, and if there's violations, you can revoke them. But that's an administrative, that adds a whole another layer of administration
That
and
was sort of
cost.
the thing I was,
Yeah.
even, the county ordinance, outlines a lot of things that we're obviously, we've adopted it as already, and we're not doing that. So,
Well, two things there. One, the village, we contract with the code enforcement officer. From pretty much, I think we're not renewing that contract, and it's just going to be under my purview. And something I'm doing is actually updating a lot of this, because I did this in my previous job. We had a whole code enforcement division, and so I have kind of like generic language, and we just need to now click it to what fits Marvin best. But the biggest thing in there in those chapters are procedures for violation, and you clearly outline a procedure. The problem with the animal one, I'm not a full-time animal control officer, and it says like if a violation exists, I think it says like the animal control officer must deliver a handwritten letter within 24 hours of the violation, and if it still exists after 72 hours, they can seize the animal. It's like, okay, yeah, maybe that makes sense for somebody doing it full-time. Yes, this is in my job description and certain things, but it's like, let's clarify the procedure in the enforcement side of it. And that's going to be done in a different, I think chapter 10's like our penalties and
That's
stuff.
right. That chapter was just revised.
Yeah. Really, like I said, any type of violation, if it's zoning, nuisance, animal, all of that, is I'm basically going to create a clear procedure of once a once a complaint's received, a letter will go out. They'll have anywhere. Most ordinances will stay within 10 to 25 days to correct the violation. You want to be careful with that if it's a animal, 10 days to correct it. So it's kind of getting some of that clarification. I don't know if some of that will come to you guys, because that's not really a zoning, it's more just of an ordinance. But a lot of that's going to be covered throughout my ongoing revisions of the whole thing. There was something else I was going to say, and now I just forgot it.
like I said, that was one of my big things, in looking through this thing. And while we're on 90,
Hold on, John, I remember what I was going to say now, if I can just finish. The second part about permitting chicken or animals and stuff, I don't think we need to go that far. That's why in the zoning, if we have where the structures and the use itself have to require permits,
That you're requiring the structure itself to be
Both.
permitted, because it is an accessory dwelling, for chickens.
it would be a structure and a use. The problem is, one of the questions that came up, and specifically regarding the kind of an issue ongoing with the neighbor, is that legally a structure, and I talked to the attorney about this, is anything under 100 square feet, is that considered a structure, like a doghouse and stuff? We're trying to make sure it doesn't matter the size, the use, and the use is for that structure, and this is what is needed. A permit's needed regardless, and then to have the permit, it must comply with all these regulations. So the use and permit itself, yes, will need to be permitted, but it's not like they're going to have to get a ongoing permit for each animal, and need to be updated every year.
I noticed Waxahaw's said they have to have an annual permit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with Hunter. Like, I don't think at this point you require permits unless there are some egregious violations where we get to the point where we have to. Waxahaw's got a lot more administrative layers and employees,
they've got a lot
etc.
more
I imagine
people.
Gastonia, they have the permit. I'm sure they have many more layers. I think for this municipality, you get the structure in place and try to not go down that administrative route.
And the thing is about them requiring them to have permits and stuff, it's like, we can't, like, once a structure's built, you can't revoke the permit. But when they sign that application, they are signing that they are compliant, what they are in that application, this is what they're gonna do, and that they're gonna comply with all other sections. I always make sure in the notes too said, whatever must comply, and I put the specific sections, I print them out, highlight, and say, hey, this is exactly what you're saying, you just signed that you're complying with. And then then there's no question. And then it's like, okay, well, you're not in compliance with this, and I can, once again, that violate. It's a clearer
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Then if
No,
they don't
that
comply,
makes total
we
sense.
abate it either through having animals removed, fines, structures removed. I mean, there's different ways of abatement if it gets to that point. But all that's going to be kind of clarified in that enforcement part of all of our ordinance. Okay, that's.
And I don't know whether you want to get into, quote, nitty-gritties of wordage or something, do we?
What do you mean?
Well, once again, I'm looking through this. In 90.090, I guess that's suggested or proposed change, 1. I get,
So, what I can do is
C1, excuse me, but.
John, what I can do is, so I put all of her recommended changes into a Word document. And then I highlighted in yellow when we go through this, and we can just literally go through her changes of staff recommendations, and I can explain why. It's really just open for your guys' discussion and what you guys feel like is maybe the best fit here. And then a few things in green are stuff that like maybe need some clarification. I know what the applicant's trying to intend, but it just I've got 8 different ordinances here, and it's just maybe polishing what is truly trying to be said.
Yeah.
My copy,
Yeah.
was that, and I think this had to do with chickens. If you had a lot of at least 1 acre, you could have chickens. So we've got chickens all in Marvin Creek or Firethorn. Should we enlarge that some,
Well, they may have homeowners
but
covenants.
yeah,
that prohibit them,
they may, but.
This is
Yeah,
really
a
for
lot of the acreage, I mean, I don't know what the right answer is.
Yeah, and,
This is just to get the conversation going of,
Yeah.
it needs to be something, what is the something?
Yeah,
I mean, Mecklenburg County, you can have, in the city limits of Charlotte, you can have chickens. So, and they're on like postage stamp lots. Some of them.
okay, and.
So, but yeah, I mean,
But-
HOAs are going to
Yeah.
restrict it even further. I
Yeah.
think we just provide the baseline, and
Well,
then
and I
if they
think
need
it's
to go further,
the
they can.
more modern HOAs, because chickens are such a prevalent thing right now. I know, I have a friend in Providence down south, they're not allowed to have poultry. And I don't know what Firethorn and some of the other
No.
neighborhoods are.
And even,
Down in
it
the country clubs
addresses,
don't allow all chickens.
Well-
chickens a lot, but, also, it references fowl, but then, chickens. And so geese or ducks, etc. I know my neighbor has chickens and geese and ducks. They've got a lot larger property, but still,
I'm not trying to like jump around here.
yeah.
But 2 things there. Yes, what this ordinance is trying to achieve is regulations, but really I think it's going to kind of regulate itself, because then when we put in regulations of like they must be pinned, and the pin must be X amount of feet from the property line and X amount of feet from the dwelling unit, that's all going to self-regulate itself to an extent. Like the acreage, I don't necessarily think matters. For example, one of my recommendations says like pins and coots must be a minimum of 250 feet from all adjoining dwellings, meaning dwellings on other properties.
So adjoining dwellings, but not necessarily
The property line.
property line.
Because look at the difference in properties in Marvin. You got some 5-acre lot, but it depends on where the house is, because ultimately whatever the accessory use on one property, where it's located is how it's going to impact the surrounding. So I put 250 feet. That was just really a throw in the dark. I mean, it could be less. I don't think it necessarily needs to be more. I think anywhere from 100 to 250 feet is acceptable, because that's where the use will be contained itself. If it's the chickens, they're going to be in a pen. Like that's what's being proposed. I agree with that. Pen or coop, but then that means where all that activity is happening, that specific use in that structure is 250 feet from any dwelling, adjoining dwelling.
And are they, like, for the chickens, are they allowed in side yards? Because I see side setbacks, but does that only
So
apply
what
to the
I-
backyard, or does that also apply to side yards?
I meant to put rear and side. Good point. Why I did that is where, and when you get into 151 where it has those other setbacks, I think the structure itself, depending on what it is, once again, I don't think it matters how close it is to a property line. I mean, maybe depending on the accessory use, it's once again the dwelling. And that's just my recommendation. It's really, like I said, it's open for discussion. This is just stuff based off of what I've experienced in the past and the other research and stuff like that. Like right here, I said must meet the minimum side setbacks, rear, it should say rear and side of detached accessory structures, which would be 20 feet and 10 feet on the rear. I'm not saying that's what it has to be, and I'm not saying that's what works perfect. That's just what I put in here for a talking point. You guys can put, it could be where you guys have a minimum side setback, kind of like what's sort of outlined here in 151. But then I think they're, you know, where it says poultry and livestock, it says 150 feet. In my opinion, just based off of this ordinance, if you think about certain size of property, that means a property would have to be a minimum of 300 feet wide.
Yeah.
But I do agree that it should be at least X amount of feet from any adjoining dwelling. I mean, it could be 300 feet or something. I mean, but I think those setbacks, especially with their pending coop, should be anywhere from maybe 20 to 30 feet from a property line, or 15 to 30.
I'm just thinking about one of my neighbors who has horses and pasture land in the front and the back and then along the side. And then the neighbor has a chicken coop, which was kind of on the side of the house. So it might not have been, it might have been within, you know, 250 feet of the main dwelling, but it was still fairly near where the horses are. And if we're talking about, you know, coyotes, attracting coyotes and things like that, you know, you're now starting to get into where the horses are hanging out and stuff. So I don't own horses, so but dwelling and I mean, I'm sure that they would prefer it to be further away from the property line, not necessarily from their dwelling, especially when you're in rural situations. I don't know if you guys have similar things like that in your neighborhood. You live in a more rural neighborhood?
Yeah, there's no really no HOAs relating to this subject.
Yeah, we've had an issue with that same
Yeah,
situation.
we ended up changing our CCR so that to
Yeah.
deal with chickens.
And that's, like I said, that's where some of this gets tricky. If we had regulations that either said it's prohibited or didn't have regulations sort of at all, and then it could be interpreted that they were never allowed.
Could we do like a, I'm sorry for cutting you off, but could we do like a minimum, you know, side and rear setback, but it must be at least 250?
Yeah, that's exactly
You know
what I
what
was
I mean? So
trying to
it's
do.
like
I just put in there for the time being, like, whatever the setbacks are that we kind of, but it, you
Yeah, because
know,
if we just did the
here's the-
distance of the house, the rural properties are gonna get screwed over because they could put it right up on their property line because it's 250 feet from that.
yeah, and like I said, when
So-
then it comes to, like, in their case, or like the case you were interested in, that's why I was saying, it's like, yeah, but then you're running into a case of an accessory use beside an accessory use, and still how can that potentially interfere? So I'm open for recommendations. I just kind of put that in there as I thought that needed to be something that was added, and then it will also then be reflected in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, and I don't think side yards, I don't think we were, what was the issue we were having with accessory dwellings? Couldn't be in the front.
Yeah,
But
Except,
was it allowed in this, well, we
Our
were
ord-
talking about runs
Yeah.
for horses and stuff. There was
Yeah,
some
you-
grandfathered in, but
yeah, I think it's,
Yeah, that's where
they're
it gets-
allowed in the front, in front of the front line of the house.
the building, yeah, well, that's where our
Which-
ordinance gets even,
Causes a problem there
Mixed up.
for those, you know, 5-10 acre lots, you know, that the house is set way back.
the way it reads right now for agriculture accessory uses and structures is right here. It says buildings may be located within the rear yard of any residential lot or on the side yard of any residential lot containing 5 acres or more in size. Contiguous lots owned by the same entity, provided that agriculture buildings comply with all applicable setback requirements of this chapter. I missed one, but basically they're allowed in the side yard if it's above 5 acres, but they're not ever allowed in the front yard. Now, that brings up the question, that's part of the thing I'm trying to clarify. Is a horse riding arena or something like that considered a structure, or that's where this ordinance doesn't really make sense? Because is it the structure or the use? That's what I need to clean up, because you can argue either way in my opinion.
Yeah.
But to your point, yeah, I know people in Meadow like to have a riding arena in their front yard.
Or even, once again, my neighbor, and I know
Lights.
the previous owner had to go through variance and stuff like that because of the run-in shed for the horses. And as I understand, you're supposed to have one in basically every pasture or something like that. So the pastures in front of the house,
Yeah.
because the houses, on large lots typically are moved back.
The other thing here is that whatever we do adopt, especially structure-wise or use, they're gonna have to then fall under that if they're non-conforming, meaning whatever ordinances we do adopt, I can't go and then enforce something on those
Something
people.
that already exists.
But,
yeah.
and
And
that, existing, not only structures, but animals. Or-
Yeah, legally, let's say whatever we put the number at chickens and I can't get rid of it, because that's what I was trying to get at. If we didn't have regulations in place, well, then we would be creating a whole new use in regulations, meaning that it beforehand is prohibited and I could go back to it. I did that in a previous job because technically chickens were never allowed, or roosters, and so I was able to enforce that. But since we say poultry and other livestock and never outlaw roosters or the number, I can't then go and say, hey, now you can't comply. What I can do now is, one, anytime a person calls and says, hey, can I have horses, chickens? I'm like, yeah, but you gotta comply with this. Two, if I get a complaint, then whoever those owners would have to then provide documentation of when they obtained those animals or whatever. If it was after the effective date of this ordinance or whatever gets adopted, then yes, I can enforce it. If they have documentation that they got these chickens 5-6 years ago, I don't know the average life of a chicken, but then I can't necessarily do anything. It would also apply, let's say a person has 23 chickens and we set the number at 10. I can't make them get rid of the 13. They were then not allowed to have any more than 23 if documented on either a pre-existing issue or whatever. And the goal, anytime in non-conformities, is to work towards compliance. Pretty much if a chicken dies, you can't replace it.
You're quite the chicken expert now.
But yeah, I mean, so basically what this is doing is creating regulations in place. I've gotten calls, and I mentioned it to Ms. Lyons, the gates that we passed. The developer asked me, one of the future buyers was asking about horses, mini ponies, and whatever, and I was like, well, here's what our current ordinance states, but we're also going through a process right now. So it's like, it happens. I would say I get more calls about how many horses I can have than probably chickens. But still,
I'm really mostly interested in monkeys.
monkeys would be considered an exotic animal, and
I'm kidding.
I don't know if we really have.
But I think chickens are unique in that if people think they have the space for it, they just do it. They don't ask.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's
And
probably
they
the
also
case, yeah.
do it without the knowledge of what they're getting into.
Because you can order a coop on Amazon and put it together and
Yeah, and you can,
6
every
hours.
feed store right now has the baby chicks, so
Well, and now with the new
Tractor Supply.
Tractor Supply coming up, you're
Yeah.
gonna see.
So you
it's
get
gonna-
your kids in there and they see the baby chicks and they're like, oh, let's bring some home, you know?
Used to have them every Easter.
That's how it,
Back when.
that's how,
yeah,
same
you
with a
probably
bunny
never saw
rabbit.
'em.
A
Well, I had a
rabbit.
duck.
Yeah.
I think it would move to Parkwood Park.
Tell me that it was rabbits.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe we could talk to the Tractor Supply store and say, look at the address and say, oh, do you know there are Marvin Art ordinances? Like, we can educate all of the, I mean, it would be great to do maybe even to do like a, hey, are you interested in chickens? Like, this is, like one of those little, I did that at like one of the museums.
Did you know?
They were having a chicken day and we went and learned about chickens and I was like, nope. But I mean, to have one, then you could educate on what it really takes and what our ordinances are around chickens. So.
Yeah, and that's where you can get an expert like the ones who put together these documents. They come, that's part of their job is to come in and educate the public. So they'd be happy to come educate the public.
Marvin Day, we're gonna add a chicken. We're gonna add
I think
We're at capacity for Marvin Day.
Marvin Day at Publix, so you give it up and they'll make it dinner for you.
But getting, I mean,
Certain regular chicken.
you know, I
BYOC.
there's a lot of really what we're trying to achieve is really kind of getting a base. I mean, it's not going to be perfect. The other thing is here is like, once again, creating this base. So if we get a complaint, I mean, specifically like if you know that there's an ongoing issue, and I get it, and it's just part of our ordinance is unclear. If we had regulations in place, it'd be a whole lot easier. But it's still going to be kind of some fine tuning and tweaking. It's just we need probably some updated language to go ahead and get on the books, and then move from there. I mean, like I said, it's definitely something that's needed. I think Ms. Lyons has done a great job at outlining it. It's just, I then have to now figure out the best way to do it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, this is not something that can vote on at this point in time. I mean,
Well, we don't have a finished.
yeah, that was the point I was making.
Well, you do. I mean, it's hers and then my recommendation. So it's really, like I said, it's her application is kind of a standalone thing. This is basically my staff report and my recommendations per the application. But like I said, you guys can then make a recommendation to recommend as presented, to not recommend. It's still going to council one way or another. Recommend with changes and stuff. I mean,
All right, so the greens are yours. Do you have anything beyond the
Well, so-
zoning? I mean, when you
Yeah,
get
so
into-
really, I do want to get into, so I really didn't change, all this is straight from her application. I didn't change really anything of her first two. You know, I'll mention, Councilmember Wortman, Andy, does have chickens, and so he's kind of discussed this with me. I think he kind of misread some of this because, like I said, this is how it's done. I mean, and I recommended this to her. Basically, all ordinances will say it's easier to state all this is prohibited unless outside of these exceptions. So it's like when you first read this, it's saying like livestock, or how does that? Shall be unlawful for any person to keep, maintain any livestock, any chickens, turkeys, ducks, guineas, geese, pheasants, pigeons, and other domestic fowl within the village, except in accordance with the guidelines in this section. That kind of covers this. Like basically, then it's like, okay, you can't have any of these unless you meet
These
this criteria.
requirements, right?
Really, like I said, there's no other changes here. Where it gets into changes, where we do start talking about fowl. In her request, she breaks out the turkeys, ducks, guineas, geese, pheasants, and other domesticated fowl, and then chickens.
Yeah, again, that just mirrors Gastonia. That
It's-
could be just foul.
Well, yeah, it could, because I think the way Gastonia's has it, and it's in your guys' packet, is it does break it up, but then it gets into chickens if it's under an acre, and then I think it says if it's over an acre or two, it's a certain amount of acres, and it just follows the procedures and guidelines in subsection D.
Turkeys, ducks, guineas, and geese, though, that was what was confusing to me, is that it doesn't seem to scale, like, the tract shall consist of at least 1 acre of land under single ownership, and then it doesn't really talk about, like, the limit of animals you can have
That's all.
per tract, like, and I mean, I know that later down here, it's like, basically you can't,
Yeah.
you know, it's like a catch-all that's basically like, where was the language? No person may locate, construct, or operate any animal breeding, growing, or feeding establishment for commercial purposes within the village. So,
I want to add, why you just said that, this ordinance would only apply to residential.
residential properties, not agricultural.
Basically is
Yeah.
not as an accessory use, not anything for commercial purposes, riding academies, whatever. It's strictly for domestic
Yeah,
and
it
residential
almost
use.
feels like that last statement there almost needs to be at the top of this, where it's like, the proposed change 2D, like, this. I will.
Oh,
I
at the
will.
very top.
The prohibition.
So just, and then, this pertains to, residential properties only, commercial or agriculturally zoned parcels refer to whatever the ordinance is.
Vietnamese potbelly pig.
There is somebody that has a potbelly pig in mind.
There was a
Is
little
it
pig
Vietnamese?
on the loose in our neighborhood the other day. I don't know where it came from.
Yeah,
We don't allow
yeah, I don't
pigs,
know,
so.
you know, I don't know whether it's 1 or 2 or what's the, and once again, it depends on how much acreage. To me,
Okay.
Now, a 1 acre parcel,
Go for it.
in Marvin Creek, even though they probably wouldn't allow it anyway in there. But still, you know, a 1 acre site, you know, you can only get this much on. But if you got 20 or 30 acres, which we do have,
Like there are no limits on the turkeys, but you put limits on the
Yeah,
hens.
and some of this stuff, when you read through it, it does conflict, like
Yeah.
the towns conflict
The
themselves, so
Simplest
it
way to
could
do
be
it,
consolidated.
yeah, in my opinion, the simplest way to do it would just be include fowl all in one thing.
But I mean,
And
and
you
the
can
fowl,
just put a
the
number.
fowl doesn't have any maximums.
Well,
You
we
would
can do
put a
that.
maximum on fowl.
Yeah.
I kind of
Yeah,
did that.
chickens are 10 hens, up to 10 hens, and then
The
turkeys,
real
ducks, and
question
geese
here,
don't have
and
any.
we're gonna get into it, is gonna be the roosters. I don't have a preference. There's documentation that says roosters aren't needed for domesticated chicken things, and then there's people that tell me that there are.
Yeah, so and these documents talk about this multi-page from the Cooperative Extension Service talks about how you don't need a rooster to make hens produce the maximum number of eggs.
That's,
And I don't think we allow roosters in our neighborhood.
Most places don't.
They are noisy all the time.
Roosters are used for protection and herding the hens, but if you're pinning them up or creating a pin area for them to whatever walk, swaddle, I don't know what they do. You don't necessarily need one. This is, like I said, this is really open for discussion. You guys can make the recommendation of however. I will say, just based off of just what I do know of people having roosters throughout Marvin and how I tried to find a middle ground here. What I did is, or just my recommendation is I said, I did a maximum amount of chickens, 20, and I think potentially you do that, just foul. Now, yes, that's a hefty number. Like I said, there's no telling. I think, yeah, Gastonia says 20 per acre, 10 per acre, and then it can be proportionate. Well, I really don't know if this is really going to need the necessary to be proportionate, because I think you're really looking at some of the larger tracts that are already around 3 to 5 acres. I said basically the rooster, permitted only if the owner complies with all the provisions of this chapter, as well as chapter 92, which is the noise, and 151, and then I
But
basically
how do you
said-
keep a rooster from crowing? I mean,
Yeah.
like that's the thing is like,
like,
and I think
that's
that's
what we're
where
running. Yeah, and I
that's
mean,
where you're gonna get a run on.
we'll have to clarify some of that
complaints.
in noise.
So
If
so
it's allowed in Marvin too, and it's not allowed in other municipalities around here, it could attract residents who want to have roosters too, so you might
I'm
be exacerbating the
completely-
problem.
I'm completely open to whatever. Like I said, all this is open for discussion. When it comes to the roosters, in my preference, so be it.
So there's a couple issues with roosters. So yes, there's the noise, but if you have a rooster in with hens and you're not collecting your eggs, those
The offspring.
become chicks. Some of those chicks are going to become roosters, and like it says in this document, it is very hard to get rid of unwanted roosters. And they actually say it's irresponsible to have these unwanted animals. And then if you have multiple roosters, they feed off of each other, so it gets even louder.
Right. They kind of call and respond, which we've.
Well,
Yeah.
they're trying to outdo each other.
so then
It's the
is the
cock
goal then
walk.
not to have males, which is the rooster in the?
Yeah, I mean,
Agreed.
like I said, most ordinances and what I've done in my
Informal
previous
would.
job is you typically outlaw males. The issue is that was really we didn't have those regulations in place. I'm good with not saying no roosters allowed, but then it gets into that enforcement standpoint of who had roosters before the adoption of this ordinance and who didn't. I might be able to clarify with the attorney, because if he backs me and says, well, we say no roosters are allowed here, then I can potentially, then it would be kind of a complaint-based thing. I'm not going house to house checking for a rooster. I'm not going to look at every chicken and be like, hey, you a hen, rooster? It's going to be a complaint-based type thing. But then I do have the means to enforce it, and that's really what I am trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe for those who have roosters now, it's I don't know what the correct wording is, but like a conditional use permit. Like you can
Or pre-existing condition.
keep this, but if it becomes a nuisance, somehow, because it's a nuisance, it's a defect to the properties around it.
Or you just get an accounting of who does have them, so that
I know.
If it's based on complaints,
shoot.
then you don't have to, like you said, you don't have to go door to door and say, hey, there's roosters here. If you just say, there's a rooster next door and it's crowing all the time, you can say, okay.
And that's where, like I said, in my previous job, you didn't have regulations in place, so when you put it in place, like I said, it was technically not allowed in the first place, but now you're specifying. So those attorneys for those municipalities I served were like, hey, yeah, you can enforce it. Here, the only thing that I worry about is, like I said, we sort of had regulations with poultry, and I'll just have to talk to Chaplain to see what his because at the end of the day, I'm good with enforcing it, but I gotta have his, because if there's any pushback, you want to have, yes.
Well, maybe there's a way to, like you were saying, where you refer back to the other sections, maybe we need to tighten down the nuisance.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to maintain, I've done research on this, if it's a crow collar, if it's certain farming, chicken keeping techniques, but, soundproofing coops, pens, whatever, it's just, I don't know what the best approach is.
So, once again, I don't know.
And that's where
Are they more prevalent in free range versus in coops? You've got one
So,
next door. I don't know what they've got.
it's definitely louder if
Like
they're
free
free ranged. And they're probably, I would guess, a little more protected because they've got more of that area to protect.
I was at an Airbnb property in Mecklenburg County a couple of weekends ago, and they had a really large coop, and it was like 10 hens in each side, like they were connected but separated, and each one had a rooster, and they were going the entire freaking party. It was like, oh my God.
They crow at certain times of the day to control the chickens, but the crow is their startle reflex. So whenever they're startled, it's like their warning sign of something's not right, something's not, and once they start, they don't stop. And then if there's multiple, it's even worse.
Yeah, and that's where, if basically not free range, you go sometimes, based off of the information provided and research that I've done, roosters not necessarily needed because part of it's once again for protection. If it's other predators, hawks, kind of whatever, like that's their startle reflex. They also protect their area. If they're in a pen, if they're in a coop, that chance is still there, but it's less. It's limited. So that's what like I said, I know what their preference is, and it's her submittal.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of put some stuff in here where it's like, hey, this is basically everything in yellow is mine, but I also said, hey, I did it because let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I didn't hear us talk about in 151-100, where it's the accessory use of structures, was there something that you put in there to tighten that up a little bit?
Yeah, so basically, all this stuff right here is in Chapter 90 from
and for the wildlife.
And so where it talks about pens and coops shall be a minimum,
right?
We would update. Once again, we could do specific setbacks from property lines, then do a minimum for joining dwellings, and that would also then be referenced in that highlighted section in green.
Okay.
For example, if we did horses and we said maybe 20, we'll say 50 feet from property line, and then if we want to do 150 or whatever from dwellings, I would add that. So it would say side minimum rear setback, but say 50 from any side adjoining property lines and 150 from adjoining dwellings, or it could be more than that.
So adjoining dwellings and property lines, because that's where we don't want people putting it on the property line.
Correct. So if it's 50 feet from a property line, that's one thing. But on some of these larger tracts, the houses could be they could be anywhere from actually 150 feet to greater than that. So
Yeah.
you are then protecting the interest of property as well as the potential nuisance of noise, sound, because even hens can be loud when they're laying eggs. All of that from the dwelling itself. Because the dwelling is the principal use of the property. Anything else of the properties are always accessory, and they're supposed to be insubordinate or whatever in principle, but it's simple just to say dwelling. But I do think a property line should also be addressed here. But I definitely think this needs to be updated because this is unclear.
Well, and just, like Hunter referred to earlier, for the poultry, if it has to be 150, I can't totally read what it says, but is it 150 feet from
Yes.
the property line?
Yep.
So you take a 5-acre lot, or 5 acre lots, you can't get 150 feet from the lines.
Yeah, they're rectangular and they're about 250 feet wide and 700 feet long, so it's,
So technically, no poultry or livestock would be allowed, even on
Really?
5 acres, like you could.
that configuration, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really,
that's
but
not a lie.
and that's what's unclear because there are a lot of people that have chickens. And really, based off of what this is, what I've gathered, unless you have like 8 to 10 acres and you have 500-foot wide lot at least 350 foot, it's like,
There's your legal loophole right there, baby.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. And I talked to the attorney about this. Is like, is this? It does say agricultural buildings right there, but it's like if you go look at some pre-existing conditions here in Marvin, it's like, okay, were they just there and nobody ever complained about it? But I mean, you were mentioning kind of complaint. I mean, certain issues potentially Meadowlark. It's like we're trying to clarify that, so then we always have that to fall back on as to regulate. But like I said, that all this is, like I said, open for discussion.
And
kind
I
of-
think the more permissive we get with things, the more problems we create for ourselves, meaning it's harder to enforce, which, is what brought about some of this. Meaning, if you allow the roosters, then you've got a whole nother layer of issues that you could
And
just
enforcement
eliminate
too,
by
yeah.
not having roosters.
There'll be more complaints with roosters being allowed, I think, on the noise nuisance versus
Yeah.
not.
We can get a consensus right now on that, and then we can do one that was already her recommended thing anyway, so it's not like we then have to make a motion. But if we do any of these additional recommendations, obviously we can clarify it, but I can get a final document for the minutes. But if roosters are a no-go, I'm good with. I mean, it's all open for discussion because that, like I said, that is what she requested in her changes anyway, and so. This was just, like I said, stuff for talking points that I knew
That's
that.
probably, the easiest thing to address.
Yeah,
The others, details, and you're trying to think of all the permutations.
Do you guys know how to do, if you're on like Google Maps, how to do, draw a line to see
Oh, no.
footage?
I think if you go to GIS, doesn't it show distances there?
what are you looking at?
Can you just draw, like, get a distance on Google Maps?
Probably not, no.
Yeah.
What are you trying to find?
I'm just looking to see kind of like what some of the setbacks are just in my own neighborhood, just because.
In your name, I mean, that you.
I mean, we've got
You are very
pastures along the property
similar.
lines, we've got.
Yeah, but see, that's
We've got.
that's
accessory
also kind of
farms.
some of this
It's
is
so old.
going
though,
to
I
be
know
potentially
it's
done
old.
on the back end. Clarifying, for example, in this. I'm not trying to jump around, but it is all very good discussion here. Horses, typically barn and pasture land. The structure itself, I think, should comply with the setbacks. The use, because you got pasture land, so it could be open, kind of free roam, as long as it's fenced in, which I think is part of her recommended changes. But you also have then like riding arena type areas, and once again, I think that's not a structure. As long as I think the structure complies. I mean, if you want to add additional footage of the use from adjoining dwellings, that's one thing, but once again, I can't go back and make somebody get rid of a riding arena or pasture land if this ordinance adopts one way or another. This is enforceable for any new structures, any new things. But it's definitely something needed because, yeah, chickens, residential house chicken keeping, I mean, COVID, whatever, before COVID, people wanted, it's not a new thing. And so I think we definitely need some regulations in place. But I mean, that brings up a good point because the 150 feet, all of this I'm going to, kind of discuss further with the attorney because regardless of what gets adopted, when it comes to enforcement, once again, if it was 150 feet and we shrinking that or clarify, and I get a complaint about something that pre-existed due to that, well, potentially it was supposed to comply with 150 feet and I can then enforce it. I mean, it's still clarifying and it's still going to be a complaint-based type of thing.
Okay.
But it's definitely something good to have because I've received, anytime a property goes up for sale, I get 2 questions. How many houses are going to put on it? I get 3. Can it be subdivided? How many houses can I put on it? And then typically, what are the regulations for horses or chickens or something?
So, I mean, I don't know about the rest of the board, but I'm not quite ready to vote on this. I'd rather see a more finished, like I'd rather see the
Sure,
actual
where I'm-
setbacks and, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think there's still a lot, there's work to do just in terms of deciding, like, but I think we're, like, the animal part of it is
So based
pretty
on
solid,
Yeah,
except that we
I
need
think that,
a
you know,
maximum
we-
for fowls.
Fowl, just all fowl versus, chickens are okay, but geese are not okay,
based off of our ordinance, because this is a formal application, unless the applicant agrees, then a recommendation I think has to be made tonight because this is the second council meeting, so it'd be within,
It's not a council
or
meeting.
second planning board meeting, so it's been, the application was submitted on,
Beginning of February?
This is the second time it's been,
yeah, so we're
Right.
over 30 days, and I can't remember if it's 45 or 60. But then you're hitting the same mark at the 60 because next month, like we would be past that. So I'm gonna leave that up to her. Like I said, this can be recommended as presented in her application. There's a few, like I said, additional things, and I'm good with saying no roosters, but there's a few other things that we can kind of discuss now. I mean, it's like I said, a lot of it's kind of housekeeping type stuff.
there's there's a lot. I mean, there have to be as presented, or as with the following, additions.
Or as amended.
As
I'm
amended
Just say
with
as
set
amended,
with
and we just,
Hunter's recommended setbacks.
A recommendation for approval with staff revisions or something like that.
and those staff revisions are going to be everything we talked about. Like I'm not sliding. I mean, and obviously it's her application procedure, so she's going to know if I try to slide it. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine, like if we nail down directionally the animal piece and say the structures, I don't know how you need to word it, but I don't have the expertise on the structures.
this,
Yeah, the structures will dictate the amount. It's almost like form-based code in a way, right? The structure
Yeah.
dictates the amount of animals you can have.
and that's where in that matrix I provided you guys.
What's the
page, or
It's the zoning matrix.
there is zoning examples.
I didn't get a chance to get home with my computer just to look at it.
I can pull it up real quick.
I got it.
Maybe. Okay, I hasn't pulled up yet. That's cool. This computer is so lovely. There it goes. Okay. So I provided this matrix. So this is a lot of the ones that I looked at.
oh, okay, I remember that now.
When it says that it's in the zoning code, that means there's zoning regulations on it. I've got Hickory, Lincoln, Hickory and High Point, I've got Morganton, High Point, Lincoln, and Hickory. There are some good, I mean, this is how I like to do ordinance. I pull all this and try figuring out what's the best fit. Some of them that, provided by the applicant, there are, Gastonia I think does have a mixture of both. Waxhaw did, and we reviewed it, it kind of goes into horses and structures. But with that being said, I mean, there's kind of a general standard. I did do this in my previous job. I did it for a different municipality, basically kind of copy pasted, but did cater the regulations based off of the discussion. And I think, said from a chicken coop standpoint, it's 150 plus feet from any adjoining dwelling, and then at least I would say at least a minimum of 20, but anywhere from 20 to 50 from a property line. And that is something that you guys can make that recommendation with. There's the expertise. I mean, you're thinking about looking at properties. Well, our minimum property width's 130 feet. So in theory, if you do 50 feet, that gives them a 30-foot window of a bare minimum width lot to do a coop or pen.
But, what the other one said was 150 feet?
But that would be from any adjoining dwelling. So a dwelling on an adjoining lot.
Thought that was...
Oh, yeah, it just needs a setback. Yeah, I'm more comfortable with 50.
And then, but it still needs to be, I think, of something from a dwelling as well, clear.
Yeah. The 100, whatever the 150 or 250.
So
whatever.
50 from the side property lines.
I'm just talking about setback. I'm more comfortable with 50. If
Yeah,
130 is the minimum.
As far as structure.
As far as the structure.
Yeah.
I don't.
Do you have any
I don't want to hear
comment, concern over that?
No, I don't want to hear it.
So
At least for
I
chickens
guess
and fowls.
my comment would be, so I own horses, and what's the setback, 60 feet?
Yeah, and yours is like 68 to 70, I think.
Yeah,
The
I'm
structure.
still a little surprised that it's allowed to be that close to
The
the,
stable.
yeah,
barn.
to a line, so I don't know that you'd want to go any closer than the 60.
Well, I'm talking about the chicken
Just
coop.
chickens.
I'm getting clarification. The
Yeah,
coop.
so chickens, so you think of smells, right? Because that's what you're gonna have from these structures. And a chicken smell in the summer is very strong. So I wouldn't want to put it closer than I would put horses to the property line.
Well, but if we're talking like 100, if he's saying 130.
So that's where it's like,
130 is
okay,
the
if it's 50 feet from the
minimum.
property line, and let's just take let's take the preserve for an example. Those houses are pretty contemporary lots, straightforward. Well, if they put it 50 feet from the property line, the setbacks in the preserve are 20 feet on the sides. So then the house could be 20 feet, maybe a little further, but since so it's like, it then still has to be 150 feet from that dwelling itself. And most likely in some of those scenarios, it's not going to be. Now on larger properties, Meadowlark, Providence Estates, like, yeah, that's where this is that's where a lot of this would apply to, because the houses are set in different locations on the larger tracts. So that's why you still want to have the minimum from the property line. But then I think from a nuisance standpoint, I understand where she's coming, like if it's outside, kind of use, but I always say dwelling because that's an easy measurable thing. And it could be greater than 150 feet. But like I said, it could be, if we want to do 60, that's completely fine. If we want to move horses down to 50,
Yeah, I would think you'd want to make it all structures. I mean, the horses exist, like put it at
Right.
what the horses are.
Yeah,
'cause
I don't.
I'm
that
surprised
makes
I'm
more
allowed to
sense.
have my horses that close to a property line. And I don't remember what mine is. What is it, 70 or 60? I don't remember.
I know we got a permit when we built it, so it's definitely over 60.
yeah.
But
and
it's
I measured
still-
it. I
it's-
did a rough estimate
Yeah.
measured. It's over 60. But
I think it's 78 maybe.
And is that 60 from side and rear, or just 60?
so the way our current
Side.
ordinance reads is I think it's
Because keeping it
I think it's
consistent.
side and rear.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm fine with keeping it consistent.
Yeah, it makes it simpler.
Makes it easier. 60.
Yeah.
Answer is 60.
So we could do, so basically, just to clarify for the minutes, but we can do it as revised, is that I would update this to either probably just say agriculture buildings, and then maybe we can still leave maybe horse and poultry and other livestock, and do 60 feet from both the setbacks, and then I would add in, but also must be an addition X amount of feet, which
From
if it's
the-
150 or whatever we want to,
Provide me with a write-up of this.
I will. But just, I mean, I'm writing this out.
It's hard to capture this this
Yeah.
train of thought in minutes.
While he's writing that down, okay, I'm an ocean person. I've
Okay.
fished, dove my whole entire life. The smell of the chickens is worth the smell of the horse. I've never.
Yeah. So, if you go to Eastern, there's a lot of poultry houses out in
Mhm.
Eastern Union in the summer, that smell,
Well,
even
you
with
talk-
it being far away, it
Well,
is so
You're talking
strong.
hundreds or
Yeah.
thousands there
Yeah,
versus.
but also,
My dad's a poultry farmer.
but also people will get,
chicken.
and some of the farmers
yes.
around here do it, they get the poultry manure and they fertilize fields with it. When they fertilize these fields with it, that smells overwhelming.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very
never would've known.
offensive. What
Okay.
poultry is, hogs are, cattle can be.
Okay.
One
You
of
can
my
tell
neigh-
what the animal is from the smell.
Yeah.
One of my neighbors has like, I don't know, like 6
Okay.
chickens, and they have a barn that I think used to be used for horses, but they kind of built a little run out for them and everything. And they keep it very clean, like you don't, like I
Yeah.
went up and met the chickens and I don't even recall the smell because
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
was
if
very,
take-
you know,
if
they're,
you take it
they're.
away from the coop, that's the thing, is you gotta keep the coop clean,
Well,
and take it away and store it somewhere else.
so it's interesting in this document from the Cooperative Extension Service, they talk about manure removal and stuff like that, and they suggest that you do it on a day where it's not windy and it's not blowing towards your neighbor's house and like all
Okay,
this stuff.
that's the litter management
Smell,
portion of it.
yeah.
Okay.
I have a recommendation, and this might solve it. So, and this, I'm not trying to jump. So this is actually going to get into our next item. Something that we can do is actually, we can kind of not worry about from the zoning standpoint, because that might actually, we can address that next month. Because here's why. In our accessory uses and structures, we're looking at, on our next item is looking at taking or discussing the CUP or the special use permit requirements for pools. With that being said, what some ordinances do, I've had experience with this, is basically you create special requirements or certain requirements for certain uses, and you basically then outline some of that there, where then it doesn't need, it's all still administrative, because once again, think about special use permits that we get, if it meets the criteria, there's really not much that,
We need to discuss.
correct, is that we can add that into our accessory uses and structures, and then actually then specify setbacks for the structures themselves. Because really, based off of her proposal, it doesn't get that. This is actually something that I added anyway, so it could still be, we can kind of discuss and put all that in there, but we don't maybe necessarily need to worry about the setbacks per se, outside of what's in her submittal today.
So
Like, I can clarify
Yeah.
all that kind of next meeting.
So then I think if we go with Hunter's suggestion, we still need to have a consensus on yay or nay on the roosters, and then we need some sort of maximum on the turkeys, ducks, guineas.
My other recommendation,
And I don't think that 20 hens on a 1 acre property, I think that's too much.
well, that's what I'm saying. So my other recommendation would be probably to do all fowl under one, if you're okay with that.
Yep.
Say no male fowl.
Yep.
That address, because the one thing I do know about fowl, or whatever you want to consider fowl, is that the male version of that is always kind of either aggressive, protective, loud, something in some sort. So really, you encompassing it all in one, and you just saying no male fowl is how you do it.
All right, so then, now are we also gonna have some sort of scaling? So like, 1 acre, or like under 5 acres can have X many chickens, and over 5 acres can have X many chickens? I mean, cause what's gonna happen is if we say 20 hen max, a 1 acre property is gonna have 20 hens.
No, I agree. That's how I
That's
started.
just
That's how I
crazy.
started. Okay, that's how I started to write up the recommendation. Gastonia, like I said, does this is that they do it scaled, proportionate based off the acreage. The issue is though Gastonia has properties that are under an acre. We have acres plus. You know, it could be as what I was originally going to recommend was that anything between an acre and like 2.5, 3 acres, whatever you guys decide, can have 10, and then anything above the maximum is 20. But then no matter what, the maximum is 20 if the acre's there. And you can do 5 acres because that's what our agricultural it's 3 and 5 is what our existing agricultural uses and structures kind of really identify. But once again,
that makes more sense. Yeah, that's what I was sort of alluding to. Last meeting is that we've got 1 acre parcels, and then we've got 20 or 30 acre parcels, and they're not the same.
Mhm. So like up to 1 to 4 acres can have 10.
Or he said our
Up to 10.
other zoning or whatever is 3 acre for, is that right, Hunter? A 3 acre break and then a 5 acre, what were you saying?
The way our accessory use and structures read now for agricultural is that like it uses that side yard exemption if it's 5 acres. There's another exemption for agriculture things that references I think 3 acres. Once again, any type of true agricultural accessory use or whatever, you're going to need a minimum acre. When you get into horses, and what she's recommending is 2.5 for some of that. So like, I think you use one of those numbers, 2.5, 3, or 5, as once again you kind of create that window. So 1 to 3, you can have no more than 10 fowl on the property.
And then over 3, you can have.
But I still think you need to cap it because
Yeah.
you don't want
max
to
of
20.
20.
Say proportion and then you have somebody
Yeah.
that has 5 acres that has then 50
No,
chickens.
yeah,
Like I don't think that's
keep it as
feasible,
simple
but-
as possible.
yeah.
1 to 3, and then over 3.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Is that
fine with
okay? Is there
Yeah.
any comments from you guys on that?
So the only thing I would comment is, so these are single-family residential lots. So 20 chickens produce 100 eggs a week.
Most
Which is a little bit
ordinances,
excessive.
most ordinances that I've dealt with, typically the cap's at 20, but the range is anywhere from 10 to 20. I've seen 12, I've seen 15. Like I said, the thing is that we have to think about this number is if you're doing foul all under 1. I don't know if there's any pre-existing conditions here, but this is the example that I know for a fact where I said 20 foul is because you're encompassing all of those in 1. If you still outbreak it, then if you keep chickens and fowl separate, then maybe you do 10-10, but
Yeah. So you're saying if we have fowl as a group, then it would be a max of 10 or 20, depending upon the size of the property, of any combination of all of them.
correct. But you can still, I'm trying to think.
I mean, I will say that, the way that you've broken the chicken section down, chickens are gonna be the likely thing that we're dealing with, right? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know anyone who keeps fowl. My carrier pigeons, I would love to, can I come and see? I would love to see the fowler.
I keep an ostrich in the office.
Well, some people do keep.
I thought that was an
peacocks.
alpaca.
Yeah, like I said, we've
Rest
got
of the
ornamental birds.
Yeah, we've got
Yeah.
ducks and geese.
Those
and
are
horses.
chickens and tails.
Oh, yeah. We've
Yeah.
got geese, but they don't,
Well,
no one
those-
owns them, they just hang out in the
Yeah,
pond.
Those are different.
Geese are evil.
Oh, and
They are, I've
that's
gotten
disgusting.
chased by them before.
So
Slow
You
How
can't
about-
put back what comes out of them. That's
how about
disgusting.
this then?
Sorry, but
No,
it
I
is.
know.
It's gross.
Why don't we just leave
We do
it
10 and
D
10.
D and E and you just do 10 and 10. You still do 10, I mean,
That's fine.
and then I might need to just add a little clause in there that states that you can, chickens are defined separately than fowl. I mean, where then the number doesn't get confusing. But yeah, I mean, chickens are already outlined here and we just said the max is 10. I just said she's presented and do the same thing with fowl. Because currently I think in her proposal fowl
All
doesn't
other,
have a number.
it'd be all other fowl.
Yeah,
I mean, because chickens are fowl.
Correct. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is you do fowl, and then you still do chicken. You separate them out, but you do 10 for this and 10 for that, and you don't worry. You just say you still have to have a minimum of an acre and so on. The only, if everybody's good with that, I mean, like I said, I'm not then really changing anything that she's presented outside of adding 10 to the fowl. Uh-oh. Do you have a connection?
We might have lost our Wi-Fi. We need to check that.
No, it's still there.
It said people may have a hard time hearing us.
Is that,
No, I think it was just the distance from the mic.
or was
Oh,
that
I think
Okay.
they would have spoken up if
From
they
the-
couldn't hear.
hardware or something popped that up?
Um,
Or someone to say that?
We got it was a message up top from
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw
Yes.
the message, I didn't know
Yeah.
it.
he's a little bit, further away.
So I'm just using this as a reference. I'm making the notes, but, and maybe I just, don't worry about necessarily everything in the yellow. But we,
So then the only thing I think you could say was it's 60 feet from the property line? Was that the only
We're
other?
gonna do that part later.
Oh, we're gonna do that later with the
Yeah.
accessory
yeah,
structure?
because
Yeah.
hers,
Okay.
Is there anything that, my last question, and then I think if anyone else has any questions, then we vote, but, is there anything in here about the size of the structure based on the number that you intend to keep?
that's great. It's, that gets into the whole animal control of keeping them in a adequate size, pen, shelter, or whatever. I think there was one ordinance, either that the applicant provided or that I looked at, that I think had a formula.
I mean, the horses have
One
formula,
chicken,
right? Like
I mean-
there's an acre of pasture land per horse.
Yeah, and typically, so I thought your question was about the dwelling
Yeah,
size of
yeah,
dwelling.
the
So it's the
structure.
structure.
Yeah,
accessory.
there's something that addresses,
Typically,
Yeah.
the way this is written, they should have shelter and then they're adequately contained. So that means each horse should be sheltered from the weather. There are guidelines about how chickens should be sheltered. I could figure it out. I don't have an answer for that. And then same thing with livestock. You should be able, like if you have cows or whatever, you should be able to provide them, every cow as shelter.
Okay, sure.
Out of the weather,
Thanks.
yeah.
Yes. Well, so what do you say there on number 9? A coop combination coop or pen run, the size of sufficient should be provided for the chickens.
Yeah, I mean, I think
It's kind of generic, but.
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's because like if somebody puts, I don't know, I don't want this to happen, a doghouse, and people were just putting chickens in there saying it was a coop, like that's not an adequate space for an animal. And it's the same thing, I mean, so, same thing if it would be, let's say a dog in a very confined area, or a horse, like there's a standard and you can kind of, there's research behind it, and so if that issue ever arises, kind of leaving it like that, you can then.
Or maybe you can ask when they apply for their permit for the structure.
Yeah, well, I do that anyway. I try to get the dimensions of any accessory structure, just so I know. But
Okay, I mean I think that we could deal with that. We don't have to spell it out.
Yeah, and
Must be.
Hunter, on the structures, since you're gonna be reworking the accessory buildings, you might wanna address run-in sheds.
We've
A lot of-
already addressed that, I believe.
Yeah, so our neighborhood had a run-in shed in the front yard that had to be moved, but nowhere does anybody, typically, if horses, it's a shed, like a
It's just an
three-sided
open
shed where
window.
they can get in and out of the
because
weather.
yeah, they got around it because it's potentially not an enclosed structure. So
I
they-
thought we
No, it had
already
to be
addressed that in
moved.
the text.
Yeah, well,
of it.
that's it probably.
Oh.
But I know what you're saying because I've seen it
Yeah,
used in loopholes
that got
before.
brought to us and we addressed that in
Yeah.
the ordinances, so just make sure that it's in there, cause I know we dealt with
The
it.
way I think and it's just a start. If it's anything that has a roof for the most part and a certain square footage, I mean, like
It cannot be in the front,
yeah, correct.
yeah.
Yeah, but, I don't know if you want guidelines around the run-in sheds, if,
It'll all be defined.
Yeah,
as the same.
it's covered under accessory structures, so you cannot have one in the front.
okay.
And there are some that are grandfathered in, like, Gracie, what was known as Gracie Manor, they've got, technically they're in the front, you know, they're in the flag, that, rear, thing. Okay, Guys online, do any of you guys have any questions or concerns before we move for a vote?
Oh, I'm good. It's hard to follow some of the audio, it cuts in and out, but do the best I can.
Is there anything, was that Ken?
No, yeah, that was Ken.
Ken, was there anything that, that cut out that you were concerned about or want us to repeat clearly and with volume?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Does anyone want to take a shot at making this motion?
I would recommend before you make a motion, summarize for the audio for the benefit of anyone listening later what the changes are being made to the final document. I can put those directly into the minutes, and then you can just make a motion to adopt as amended. As to recommend approval as amended.
Hunter, would you mind going over that since you've been keeping notes?
Yeah, basically you're under proposed change 2D and subsection D. You'd be adding a 10 count maximum for other fowl.
Maximum for other.
Because the chickens and those are separated. You're really, I don't think changing.
You're limiting 10 to the hens.
Correct. Well, that was already provided by or presented by the applicant.
Oh, did you add 20?
Yeah, what was highlighted is basically what I added.
Oh, what you added, okay.
So I'm going off basically what her application. So I'm basically adding 10 to that count. There was one other thing that I'm adding just as a catch-all, and I'll present that to you guys right now. If you guys have a problem with this, well, too bad. Because it's going to be something that our attorney's probably going to recommend anyway. And all it is stating is that right here, 13, I know it's hard to read, it says, after the effective date of this ordinance's existing structures or the uses of land and structures which would be permitted, but shall be considered as non-conforming, these existing structures or other uses and shall just comply with that. Basically that's stating if the attorney agrees with some of the interpretation that once this ordinance is adopted, if there was any non-conforming or any of these things going on beforehand, that most likely they're covered under the non-conforming subsections of those ordinances. It's going to be a catch-all, and most likely I recommend that in the motion. However, that's something that either will be striked out by the attorney, or if we didn't have it, he would add it. So I think just go ahead and have that language there.
So to allow pre-existing structures to be considered non-conforming.
Correct. Structures and uses. Because that's the 151 through 120. 120 through 128 is basically the non-conforming uses of structures and land.
No males, right?
Correct.
No males at all in
D as well.
D and E.
Correct. There was already that in E.
That was part of the proposal, yeah.
But go ahead and add no fowl, no male fowl in D.
And D.
Okay, so
So D
so
would be-
no roosters, no male fowl.
No
Well,
male
no roosters
fowl.
was already covered.
So what are you actually adding?
So in something in D, in her application, just adding another number. So you'd have the maximum of 10, which could be 6, and then.
But they can't have any males.
Correct.
Okay.
Other than that, everything else I have highlighted deals with setbacks and accessory stuff, which I added that in here as something I was then trying to address in that, but her submittal does not go over those setbacks, so that is something then we can address during our next meeting.
On the structure side.
Yes, it's just kind of a supplemental thing to her application submittal.
Okay.
So I've got 10 count max for fowl, pre-existing structures to be considered non-conforming, a restriction to prohibit the ownership of male fowl, and what else?
That's
What
it.
was it?
What about the, being compliant with the other sections? Is that something different?
Oh, that was from the roosters.
Yeah, that was.
You can.
I
I can add.
that's a really good.
I can add another catch-all.
Because,
Basically, add another catch-all in that states that, let's see, basically right here where it says livestock is allowed if the livestock will be kept on the track. Hold on, no. Add basically right here where it says another domesticated fowl within the village except in accordance with the guidelines of this section, and then just add another sentence that states all exceptions, or basically that any of these exceptions must also comply with any other applicable chapters, and it can be 92. You can either state if it's 92 to 151, or you can leave it at that, meaning that it just needs to apply with any applicable.
Summarize that.
Yeah.
I think what he said earlier is that you must be compliant with both chapters 90, 92, and 151.
Well, this is chapter 9, so you just need to be also compliant with any regulations in 92 and 151.
Yeah.
Would be just a catch-all. Yeah. That's another good point.
Yeah, and I think, do you know,
9.09.
so many hours into this, I have learned so much.
And
So do we.
To be
We learned so much
compliant
as
with
well.
what section?
I'd be happy to help with some other
92.
Your new sign her up. She's
92
our code enforcer. Sold.
and
There's a
150.
planning board position open, there you go.
There you go. There you go.
Are we full?
Okay.
I'll vote for you.
They were full at the moment. But this is sort of indicative of some of the others that we've gone through.
94
Definitely.
and
Other than that,
Some of them are
That
relatively
was
easy, but it seemed like most of them are rather difficult.
so is everybody good with that? We just, if
Yep.
there's
So
nothing else by the applicant, then we can.
who would like to, John, I think you should make the motion. Since-
recommend approval as amended.
Uh,
That'd be the best option here.
Make a motion to recommend as amended.
Do we have a second?
A second?
All right, all in favor of approval as amended, please say aye or raise your
Aye.
hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Can't be done.
I heard Ken. I didn't need to hear Kent. Kent, can you hear us?
All right, well, A.
There he goes.
Oh, there it
Okay,
is.
okay, there
There's
you go.
the
That works.
hand. All right,
Received.
so moved. Application is approved, congratulations.
Oh,
Thank you.
it's-
Well,
Recommended for
We'll
approval.
recommend it to the village council.
For
We're
approval.
recommending it for approval.
Yep,
to the
so
village
this will
council.
then be on council's agenda for consideration during their April meeting. There'll be a public hearing for this, and, see, you know, they have the same authority as you guys, once again, they can approve as presented, or with additional, I mean, however, but other than that, I think, yeah, heading down the right path.
Will we have the setbacks done by their next meeting? I don't think so.
No, but like I said, it's two separate things, and
Okay.
I don't, to stay on track with her application timeline, we're good. And if adopted in April, we already have setbacks in place, so it's like, if there's any major issues that arise in 1 month, I'll go off of that, but.
I would just
basically-
let when it is presented to the council, just let them know that we will be
Clarifying the
addressing.
setbacks, yeah.
The setbacks, so. Thank you for all your hard work on that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appreciate the education.
Oh,
Good stuff.
We could have gotten Mr. Chicken Man here. Mr. Poultry,
I'm not that
King of
bad.
Poultry.
I mean, I know how it smells. I know I've dealt with them before, but yeah.
We didn't hear from you on the, I didn't know until you made your comment. All right,
I'll follow up with you tomorrow.
yeah. All right, thank you all for your time.
Yeah, I got some more updates for you, but I'll chat with you
Okay, all
tomorrow.
right, thank you.
You guys-
Other
Alright.
business.
So we've already have we technically discussed the zoning text amendment to 151 accessory uses
No.
and structures?
No,
Oh, so this is a
This
separate.
is the second item.
This is the pool
Separate.
stuff.
Oh, the swimming pools, sorry, okay.
And I'm gonna be brief here, because I kind of want to get consensus. Little background is that obviously we just had a special use permit that you guys reviewed at the last meeting. Council adopted that or approved that during their meeting this month. what came up during discussion during the work session of, once again, it's a special use permit, but if the applicant complies, it's just kind of a procedural thing. I know that this was brought up, and John, you might be able to add, or board members that were here before me, and then, I know that this was an item of discussion at some point in the last 2 years for the planning board.
Yeah.
I don't know the history behind that, if that was a planning board driven thing, but in my recommendation, I think that what I was kind of stating in the previous item discussion was that we create a subsection in our accessory uses and structures and create special regulations, meaning that you have your standard regulations, and then for these specific accessory uses, and this is a good way to potentially grow in general for accessory uses, is then you can create some of these regulations, but it's enforceable from an administrative standpoint. You don't need the applicant to necessarily go through this process if they meet that criteria.
Yeah.
And
one of the things I was saying, that we had discussed it, and I think one member at that point in time wanted to keep control, but I think
We've approved every single one.
yeah, I know, but I mean,
Yeah.
I think maybe we have a much more professional staff now than we did.
Yeah, and-
Maybe that,
yeah.
And that probably is, I told them, we had less professional people. I won't say there were, in the past, and maybe that accounts for some of the stuff in the ordinances now. That's so cumbersome, and we've got to deal with all this stuff.
So then if it meets A, B, and C of a special use permit, it wouldn't come to the planning board unless you thought that there was
Well,
something.
it wouldn't be a
that
special
was-
use permit.
correct.
So would you consider it a special use permit?
It would just, so if we go this route, then I would be basically providing recommended language change at the next meeting. I just, it was brought up, and I wanted to bring it to planning board. I mean, it's still a council request, but at the end of the day, you guys are going to be making a recommendation on it, and so it's like I just wanted to know, some of the where we stand now, what are our thoughts, because basically if we're in consensus that we think a change is good, as long as it's still that control or oversight, not in a bad way, is still there, but it doesn't just then have to go through that special use
So that if
permit
it's
procedure.
business as usual,
Correct.
you're taking care of the business.
Yeah.
Correct.
Simple as that.
Basically, it would still, those same parameters that are currently there would still apply.
Correct.
For example, if the way I envision this, now like I said, I have to get it all written up and present it to you guys next month, but it basically state like, you'd have a subsection where it said, additional or special requirements for certain uses in that accessory uses section. And then it would state like if it's a pool in a side yard that abuts a rear, or in the rear yard that abuts a side yard, then it must have these setbacks, adequate screening and buffering must be provided.
You received HOA approval.
Yeah, well,
Actually,
That's not a requirement of ours.
Not either.
it's not,
Okay.
and I don't know legally if I
Not
can.
Just we throw it in there a lot of
Now,
times.
Well,
I have,
The applicant puts it
I
there,
think
but,
that,
okay.
applicant just volunteers
And,
that.
I think there's a difference.
I don't think it's something we can legally
And
require.
that's the thing that I was gonna make a comment on, is that, what is helpful when you are doing the SUP process is hearing from the applicant's neighbors that they have discussed it with them, that they're okay with it. So it could be like, here are the requirements, but this is strongly recommended. Do you know what I mean?
and
Because that is really,
I think I've seen some ordinances that actually say that. That say with written approval from your neighbors. I don't know legally how enforceable that is, and/or / like if they did it, like or how accurate. I mean, it's the same thing. Like they're signing an application and they're providing me a written testimony, quote unquote, or written statement saying that their neighbor's okay with it. If they forge it, that's a whole other situation. But it's like, I'm not gonna know unless it arises. But it's like, but yeah, I mean, I think we can put it that it's strongly recommended, and if I can enforce it, we'll enforce it. Like making it a criteria, but.
I would not make it a criteria, because you're gonna have
Yeah.
some neighbors that are just gonna say no or not respond.
Just because
And
you
as
get
long as
along
they're
with
And
it.
some of them-
as long as they're
Right.
complying,
I
in
remember
good
some of them
faith.
said, yeah, I spoke to him, but he didn't have time to give me a letter.
Well, the other
Or
thing.
someone, they just don't like each other.
Yeah.
I'm about to say, wouldn't you hate to not get a pool just because your neighbor hates you?
Yeah,
The-
yeah, I would
the-
never, I would
I'd rather you get a
never wanna
potbelly
require-
pig than the pool.
The other thing I'd recommend is that our current pool standards state that it's 20 feet off the rear property line.
That sounds right.
Well, if it's, you could add in there, and I don't know if this would create any major issues, but one of those, once again, special requirements is that if it's a rear yard that was a side yard, then it has to be 30 feet off the rear property line. Like, there's other, I think, other ways that you can still regulate it and it not be an issue. Like, if it's one of these that it's right on 20 feet, like if it's Weddington Chase is a good example that they're 15, actually I think maybe 5 foot setback or 5 to 10 foot setbacks. Well, if that side property line has a 10-foot setback, and then you're 20 feet, well, then you're only 30 feet from the dwelling. Like, that could create an issue. But if you're meeting a higher standard, then I think that's fine. And I would completely recommend us looking at that as an additional thing. That if it
So what you
abuts
would
that,
say, here are all the requirements if you're gonna put in a pool,
Yep.
that we've already got, right?
correct.
Then, if your pool is in a backyard adjoining a side, someone else's
Must also
side,
then-
you have to have these additional things, right?
Must also comply with
Yeah.
these additional requirements.
Yeah.
Dot, 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 dot. Yeah,
And then it's just spelled out and,
correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great move.
Okay.
like, I
And-
So
think,
are you gonna write something up for us and then we?
Yeah.
we
Next
can-
meeting.
And honestly, to encompass the conversation, the last item in this is we're gonna probably leave the same title as the discuss zoning text amendment to accessory uses and structures, and we'll get it all.
We'll do
in
it
one.
all at one time.
Mhm.
Okay,
Interesting, okay.
all right.
Cause, yeah, I mean, I wanted that to be an item, so then I can go back to council at their work session saying, hey, that planning board is open to the idea, and that we will then be providing a recommendation at.
You're also going to be saving applicants a lot of money.
Well, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
not even money, but a lot of time as well.
Is it $200 for a SUP or is it $3?
I think it's 3. And that doesn't, we don't really make anything off of that, like the village, I mean, basically, because that goes to mailing, adjoining property owners, which are postage, and.
Putting in the newspaper.
Putting in the newspaper.
I didn't realize it was in the newspaper.
yeah.
Oh my God, how antiquated.
Well,
Arcane.
and that's the other thing, is that there are, if we wanted to keep it as a special use permit,
Word of the day.
one thing that is, does our ordinance specifically state that it basically has to be approved by council, or it could then just in theory be approved by planning board and keep it quasi judicial that way kind of?
Other towns, usually SUPs are approved by their Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, that is true, but most of the time, some of the towns I work for, they're planning board. And
Are we the Board of Adjustment?
No. Some
There is a
municipalities.
separate-
We're a separate board. Some places, the planning board is the Board of Adjustment. They share the same role. Here, they're separate. Like Indian Trail, it's separate. Some places, the council can act as the
Yeah,
board.
they can.
Yeah.
The Board of Adjustment, here's variances, right?
Variances. Here, it's just variances and approval, appeals of staff decisions.
Yeah.
So they don't meet hard.
I was gonna say,
They've met twice this year, which is rare, but yeah, it's
Approved 2 variances.
yeah. They went through 2 variances this year. They met once. Had a variance in 2020, a training meeting in 2020, and then before that they didn't meet for 5 years. So
How do they stay up to date on what's going on?
I don't know. They do a good job.
I don't know who's on, so,
I know one
okay,
person that's-
so is there any downside to this? Moving this off of an SUP process and just making it administrative?
No, I think
I think it makes it easier on the applicant.
it makes it easier on the
staff,
applicant.
council.
You know, there's two things that will trigger a special use permit when it comes to pools. If it's in the rear yard that abuts the side yard, and if it's in the side yard. And see, this is what's interesting, is that we already kind of have this stipulation for a side yard, because it's like it can be in the side yard if it has X amount of feet from that. And we can do it the same, but if it doesn't meet that, then they can also then apply for a special use permit. And we can kind of do that same thing, where we actually say it needs to be like 40 or 50 feet from the rear property line. It might be a little large. I mean, 30 to 40 maybe makes sense, because it's an additional at least buffer, especially because side yard setbacks are less than rear yard for the most part. But then if they don't comply with that, then they then can apply for a special use permit. I can work, like I said, I'm going to look at it. If we're all on the same page, and let me dive into it and we can discuss it a little further.
So
with
really, the only time that would happen on a side yard would be for irregular shaped lots. Because if they're a typical half acre or an acre, it's gonna be square, rectangular, but it's only like, again, if it's a triangle or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's
you
usually
could
where
have
we
the
see it.
issues.
Yeah, or corner
Yeah,
lots.
like I've got a pizza lot.
Corner lots.
A pizza lot.
But some corner lots,
Ice cream cone, getting hungry now.
Trapezoidal.
some corner lots, and I think Weddington Chase is another good example of this. The houses in the Weddington Chase on corner lots sit diagonally to the corner of the thing, which
Really confuses it, huh?
It
not
does.
not
Especially
for
when
me,
you're dressed.
not for me, because the way I interpret rear yard, our ordinance is weird because most of the time it says of what's depicted as the rear yard on the plat. Well, okay, I mean, that's a plat. I get it, what it's trying to say, where the structure's at. If you walk out your back door and you look left and you look right, everything behind that, your principal structure is the rear yard. I don't care really what the plat says. So, because I had an issue with that come up in Weddington Chase where it was a diagonal lot, or there's a corner lot, house sit here. Well, did it abut that or not? The other, so, you know, I don't think it's necessarily needed. The one though I will say that is interesting and still not clear, we maybe need to add this into why we do this, is that if it's a rear yard or side yard that abuts a front yard, because the front yard's identified as everything outside the front side of your house and forward. That one that we approved September off Running Course over here in Marvin Creek is a cul-de-sac lot.
And like one house was really far back and one
Yeah.
was really far forward.
Yeah.
Regular shaped lot.
And so, like I said, I think there's ways. Just to clarify, we don't have to get into further discussion tonight. Is that we're good with potentially amending that, but I still think we could maybe put some either additional regulations in there, and if it's still they don't meet that regulation, then yeah, it would still cut down on us having these special use permits. But where they don't meet that criteria, it's maybe a good thought to. And it's like I said, the criteria is still going to be the same outside of maybe some additional setbacks that just kind of offset why it doesn't need to go to us in the first place. So
Yeah, they'll see a written version next month, and
Yep.
they can.
and that one
Mark it
copy
up.
said all of it.
Great.
Yeah, write it up.
All right.
Like it.
All right, consider adoption of revised planning board rules of procedure.
Okay, so do you guys know those awful forms that I harp on you to turn in every single year? Those are gone. Council has abolished those at their last meeting, so you don't have to fill those out anymore. To implement that change, I have to update your rules of procedure to remove mentions of that. Those forms, the statement of economic interest forms, they mirror a state process. They divulge a lot of your personal financial information. It's like I said, it mirrors a state process. It's something required to serve on a state board. It's drastic overkill for a municipality. We're not required to have something like that. But just to be clear, if you have a financial conflict of interest, you still have to say so by law. You have to recuse yourself. Save yourself the heartache and save us the time. But yeah, so I need to update your rules of procedure to reflect this change. I've made a few smaller amendments just to be consistent with other village policies, because frankly, these aren't updated often enough whenever we change policies for other matters.
I mean, I know that there was part of putting those into place were to remove suspicion from, to make it very clear that people on the planning board or on the council had no, financial gains from the heritage district. And I think that was a concern for some people. And so,
I will say,
I just don't know, like, if by removing it, I mean, I get it,
But
I mean,
yeah.
by removing
We
it,
are
like,
strictly advisory.
I will say that
We don't create anything.
I will say that a crucial part of
but the council does, so.
Well, I think they've got that.
I will say
Requirement, right?
they do not. No one has to fill out
no
these
one
forms.
does.
I will say part of being in government, serving on boards, and working with each other is the idea of operating in good faith. And that is something that I personally think this village has gotten very good at in the past couple years. I find you all to be very honest and forthcoming. I do not see the removal of these forms being an issue. And I have checked with over a dozen towns. Nobody has anything remotely like this.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like this, I think it came about because
Mm-hmm.
there was concern somewhere, and so that's why. Okay.
So basically,
So-
if you guys don't have any changes or any questions about the rules of procedure, I would just need you to move
Can you just quickly
shoot.
just quickly go through? So you're just removing the mention of the document.
That's the primary one. There's a couple smaller changes, like the wording about your stipends didn't match current policy, so that was updated. Our policy states that your stipend is based on an amount set out in the budget every year. It's in your rules of procedure at $75. So we just made that language the same. I'm actually opening the document on my computer now to see if there's any other changes. I can't actually get it to pull up right now.
Yeah, you've added items for discussion, and you struck unfinished business, new business.
Updating your rules, updating your order of business to be reflective of how we currently operate.
Yeah,
It's really small things.
really tiny. Okay. And you remove the dollar amount so that if it changes from year to year, it's not necessarily.
And our actual policy states that the amount is set out in the budget.
Okay. All right. I'm fine with this. Anybody have any questions or concerns for Austin before we move for a vote? Why he almost
Austin got it easy. How come Hunter got it?
Because I didn't have to deal with chickens. I'm suddenly craving a lot of beef.
I had beef for lunch. Okay. Do we hear a motion to approve Austin's changes to the document?
As
The rules and
presented.
procedures.
I'll make a motion that we update the rules of procedure as presented by staff.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. I will
Ken,
update
give us the
that.
high five. Ken Marino.
I will.
I don't know how to do that, so I just gotta talk.
Can't. Oh yeah. I guess we can't private chat in WebEx, but
I will finalize these changes, and you'll all get a copy via email.
okay. So we don't need to sign any updated. Okay.
This isn't something that requires a signature.
All right. Awesome. Okay. Action items.
Hunter is going to provide me with a final version of the text amendment that we really ironed out the details on.
You didn't roll your eyes though, so that was impressive. You didn't roll your eyes through the whole thing.
People say I do that a lot, but it's not something I do consciously.
You didn't do it.
As far as Hunter's going to bring back the text at the next meeting for the text amendment regarding pools, and I'll send you the revised rules of procedure. That's all I have.
Sweet.
I will also inform your absent board members of your new appointments.
My crowning.
Your crown. There's no crown.
And the vice crown.
There's no-
grovel at your feet.
There's
I
no
will be bringing
crown.
crowns.
There's no crown. I don't have a crown budget, unfortunately.
Oh, I'll bring my own. That's okay. I got one for every. All right. We've board member comments. Why don't we start with our distinguished gentleman online, Kent, with your yellow hand. Would you like to go off mute and do you have any comments?
Nothing for me, thank you.
All right, Ken.
I'm also good, thanks.
All right, our council representative. Bob, you got anything?
I just want to congratulate you, Kelly, on your new position, and Richard. I appreciate the dedication that you got into, that you folks have to do to make stuff happen in Marvin. So we all know what it takes. So Kelly, you'll do great.
Thanks, Bob. Rich?
Yes, first, I'd like to congratulate John. You've done a wonderful job, and I'll speak for myself, I have some big shoes to fill, because you've,
I'm only a size 7.
yes, so Kelly, I look forward to working along with you as the vice chair of this, and again, staff, thank you for all your time and effort.
Well, John made it easy for me as the vice chair, so I will try to do the same for you. But John, thank you so much for serving all
And
these years.
I hope I didn't sound like I was sort of shirking. I just didn't want to let
Sir, how long
the-
have you been
the
doing
board-
this?
I don't know, how long have I been on the board? Since I first went on.
He's been here long. You've probably been here, what, 2018? You've been here, what, 2 terms?
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's only been the chair
No, chair.
well, you were the chair when I came on. I've been on for at least 4 or 5 years. I don't
Yeah.
know.
You're in your second. I think you're towards the end of your second. No,
Chair
you just got
immediately.
reappointed. So you're probably you're probably into your second term now. So you're maybe
Oh,
on 3.
I'm definitely into my second term.
I just redid your appointment last year.
A year ago,
A year or
yeah.
2? I don't remember. Too
I don't
long.
know, but
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I don't sound like I'm shirking. I just didn't want to let everybody else down, not knowing.
Well,
What
we,
made-
we appreciate your service, and we're not going to let you go.
I'm not planning on
We will
it.
still be relying on you for things. So,
Hopefully, everything is fine.
well, thank you, sir. Do you have any board comments?
That was all I was gonna say. I said it already.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, then, can we have a motion to adjourn?
At 8:07.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn at 8:07.
I will second that motion at 8:07. All in favor? Give me the hands, gentlemen. Woo, woo. Ken, give me the yay.
Good night, all.
All right. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.
So are we putting these pictures up in the new village?
So